Just saying
Hi
hello.
Ted, how are you?
Second, and just starting the stream on YouTube. Hello, everyone. Saying hello in the YouTube chat and popping that out. So we will be watching YouTube for questions. And today we're going to be talking about entities. And let's see, we don't have Carolyn here, so we can skip our boilerplate. I don't see Clint either, and I think both of them are in the same meeting, which is why we don't have them. So maybe they'll hop on later and we can catch up with them. So today we're talking about entities, and SEOs, don't take too much offense about this, but SEOs tend to have very short memories. And so I like to, dredge up the past and kind of see how things have shaken out. And so about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, there was a lot of back and forth among SEO testers about entities. And there was one pool saying, hey, where there's smoke, there's fire. We ought to do a lot more research in this area of entities. It looks like it's a thing. And then there was this other, very vocal minority who would scream that, no, you don't know anything about anything, and entities isn't how it works. And so I just think people should kind of, remember claims like that. And then, a year or two down the road, let's kind of look back and see how things panned out. And so that's what I want to do today. And I'm not naming names, but I still run into people who think that entities are a ridiculous thing to do in SEO. And you don't start with that concept. That's not where somebody starts. That's where they end up. And they learn that. You're not born thinking that entities are some type of a scam. You learn it. Somebody that you trust told you to think that way. And so I just want to kind of, go over what they are and why we believe they're important and kind of where things stand today. So Lee, what do you think of this topic?
As a tester, I was doing entities testing 3-4 years ago now. And so, it's gone beyond just the are they a thing, but, the best utilization methods for them at this point. So I found it funny, the claims that, they were not a thing back then. And even today, you can still find people that are like, entities are BS, and other things like that. So, I'll let my tested data and my results, speak, speak on that topic.
Yeah, and let's see, we need another voice. So Terry, you're here. You can be a guest co-host today, right?
Sure.
So
I'm not in Vegas.
What do you think about entities in SEO?
Well, I was skeptic, not a denier or anything. Just I wanted somebody to show me some proof before I decided to fall into the category of yay, entities are the way to go. But I saw proof. From things I was trying and other people. But I do recall there were people who were just, I guess, stubborn enough to make a decision that entities were not a thing, when in fact that's the definition of them. and you know, stood their ground and just said, no, I'm not going to do it that way. I don't know if they're still in SEO, some of them, but
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting because they jumped the gun on that hardline position, and they didn't have to. Like, they could have said, I'm skeptical. I'd like to see better evidence. There's any number of things you can say other than it is 100% flat out wrong and you don't know anything about what you're talking about. Like, it's such a weird stance to take that, I don't fully understand that. Maybe it was a bad day or something, but it seemed to go on for months and months and months. And now we have a lot of people that are like still seeing those old videos online and believing it today. And, they're coming forward going, why are you, promoting this thing that is so obviously not a thing because this one influencer told me so. And so it's weird that, how that perpetuates. It's weird that that stance was ever taken to begin with.
I don't know. I don't know about that, Ted. The thing about it is I talk and say, SEO operates more like a religion than a science, because you have different beliefs about how SEO operates in different groups and very little evidence. And one of the things that, that I do a lot is I'll hear a claim and I might think to myself, I doubt it, but then I'll go and test it because I want to see what the evidence says. I want to see what the data says. And, there are plenty of times when I'm wrong about something. I'll be like, well, damn, who knew? But now, I have something else in my toolbox that is backed by, tested evidence and then in the field trials to see how much it moves the needle. But most people don't do that because that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to challenge your beliefs and people don't like to be wrong. Whereas I live in that space to figure out where I'm wrong.
Yep. So this first slide that I have up is a slide from Google, their own website, and they were introducing the knowledge graph. This came out in May of 2012, and they coined the phrase "things, not strings." And so that was an important change in mentality for them. It's when they went away from pure TF IDF in their algorithm mentality to having something more sophisticated than that. And it first surfaced in Google in the knowledge graph. But the thing about a database of entities is a knowledge graph. That is how this data is organized because it has relationships. So you might have an entity that is, gemstones, and below that entity, you're going to have types of gemstones and characteristics of gemstones, and all those things become entities. So it ends up being this graph of relationships between these these pieces of information. And it's it's pretty cool to be able to cite all the way back to the beginning, which just makes the debate more ridiculous, that Google was claiming entities from the start. And so the definitions for entities that a lot of the people who are on the pro entity side of things are using, they come straight out of Google patents. This Google patent about entities defines what they are and talks about one way Google's using. And so not only are there, claims from within Google going all the way back to the start of the debate. There are patents from Google about using entities internally. This definition, defines an entity from that patent as a thing or a concept. They go on to say that is peculiar, unique, and well-defined, discernible. And that's what we've been saying too. They're nouns that Google's AI understands. And so that Google's AI understands contextually. We've been saying that collections of entities form topics. And Lee has this fantastic example of that when trying to show what Google does with entities. Lee will list off a number of keywords. So it'll be like, crust, apple pie, sugar, cook time, stuff like that. And, what's the page about? And people come back, oh, it's a, pie recipe. And it's like, yes, that's exactly how Google is using this data, because those collections of related entities on a page form the topic that the page is about, or at least it describes it, gives you a confidence that that page is about that topic. And it's not exactly about the exact match keyword. And so it's a very interesting capability that Google has. And there's even been very public admissions that they're using entities. Like Gary Iles at PubCon, I forget what year it is, I should have wrote that down. He was quoted, you can search for the quote, you can find it on the web. In web search, we have entities for very popular authors. That is a direct quote out of Google. So we got, we have, blog posts where Google claims they're using entities. We have patents where Google claims they're using entities. We have conference quotes from the people, at the highest levels of search at Google claiming they use entities. And all of this happened years ago. So this evidence isn't new. This is start of the debate evidence. And we also have what you can see with your own eyes in search. And this is where it gets fun for me, because I love it when Google gives me the answers themselves. What do you think, Lee? Do you like seeing what Google does today?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to see, where it is, and exactly how they're using stuff now. Any changes in usage is always helpful when you're trying to figure out the most efficient ways of ranking.
So at one point, a year, 2 years ago, somewhere in that vicinity, Google was displaying entities in desktop search. And you could search for them using certain types of keyword searches, and Google would show you these entity cards. And then they took it away. They're like, oh no, we're signaling too much. Let's strip it all back. But they didn't strip it from everywhere. It's still in places. So I'm going to show you how you can get Google to show you the entity cards again. So you open up an incognito window, you go to Google, and when you're on the Google page, I want you to open the inspector. So you just right click in the white area and select inspect. And then it'll pull up a very technical window. And in a toolbar, there's this little device type button that I want you to click. And then you'll see at the top, there's this dimensions drop down. And I want you to set it to be an iPhone 12 Pro. And then you go to that Google search and you type in types of frogs. And when you do that, you'll see these cards show up. All right. And those cards are from an entity database. Those are entities. The various types of frogs are entities. So if you had a page about frogs, you would mention, this toad and that bullfrog and this other frog. You would mention various types of frogs and characteristics of frogs, and that would help identify that your page is about frogs. And so that's the idea here. And so this is how you can see what those important words are that are topically relevant to frogs. So Lee, I showed you this yesterday. You get kind of excited when I started to show you that you can still see them in search.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
I enjoy that, but now you can get a little creative and take a little time and look at the code that Google uses to display those, and you can extract a lot of useful information about a topic.
Yep. But I mean, here they are in Google. And the question still is, how do you know they're entities? What if Google just has a database about frogs? Well, that's really specific for Google to make a dedicated database about. And B, it's not just frogs. So here we have types of lawyers. So these are all entities: family law, corporate lawyer, labor law, personal injury lawyer, immigration law. Here's that types of frog one, but bigger. You could do types of bags: handbag, tote bag, messenger bag, backpack. This goes everywhere, like e-com and information sites and everything. Types of gemstones, mentioned that one earlier. Types of cars: hatchback, SUV, sedan. Cities in Washington: Seattle, Olympia, Tacoma. And everything you write content about has entities in the entity database. And what we often like to say is that if you think a word has a dedicated Wikipedia page, that's a pretty good indication that it would be an entity. And Wikipedia draws from databases like Freebase and Wikidata, and they have very specific entity database IDs, very specific IDs. And those will come up later. Here we go: types of jewelry: rings, platinum, bracelet, earring. So types of jewelry entities. So if you were making a web page about jewelry, your web page would probably mention these other words. It's not about the exact match. It's about the words that bring topical relevance to that discussion. So I repeated types of lawyers there. Sorry. Types of patio furniture. So I got very niche here. But here we have aluminum, wrought iron, Adirondack, wood, table, chase lounge, wicker, and the list goes on. So you can get very niche. And when I like to test concepts about entities, I like to find entities that I can influence that have no search volume. And so I've found entities that get absolutely no search volume. One of my favorites are ancient microscopic fossils. And so if you find the right obscure ancient microscopic fossil, you have an entity test bed of entities that get no search volume, and you can use them in different ways and see how they influence test pages. And so I like to use Elphidium because, well, nobody searches for that prehistoric microscopic fossil. So if you're testing entities, look for the real obscure oddballs, because then you get a really pure test case. And they're real keywords too. So that's the other interesting thing. So I mentioned we come back to the IDs and source. It turns out that you can right click on these entity cards and inspect them and find information like Lee was mentioning earlier. And it appears that there are several systems, several different kinds of databases for these entities. And when the information is coming from the public databases, they tend to be described in this way: data entity ID. From Google's source code, they're calling it out an entity ID. It's the actual entity ID from the Wikidata database or the Freebase database. And Google has one too, and it's got a G in it. And then the entity name for that ID. So this is the unique ID from the public database, and this is the name given to the entity. That's how we know that the entities we're measuring and working with are in fact the same entities that Google's working with. They share the same public entity IDs from these public databases of entities, which is a weird concept all to itself, that you can go to a public database and look up things that Google's AI understands contextually. Like, you can look that up. These KC ones, I think, are a proprietary system that are somehow related to the knowledge graph, maybe. Not entirely sure, but it looks like Google has a proprietary entity database that they sometimes draw from. So you'll see when you do these different types of searches that it'll flip-flop depending upon where they're pulling the information from. We saw this yesterday with a search on neighborhoods, that we are getting cities from a public database, but neighborhoods from this other proprietary database. But still, if you have a page about cats, you're probably going to mention the British short hair and a Siamese cat and the ragdoll. These are words that you would talk about on a page about cats. And so there's not a lot to this episode, but I just want to review the evidence for entities if you're still on the fence about them. Google has a patent for them. Top level people at Google, say they use them. We see them with our own eyes in search. They're labeled as entities in the source code. They reference the entity IDs in the public databases about entities. We have statistical data that they influence rankings, and we have anecdotal accounts, testimony from SEOs successfully ranking pages using entities. Like, I don't know if that level of evidence isn't sufficient to say that entities are a thing. I don't know what level of evidence you expect in SEO. Like, I mean, how much more evidence do you need?
We also forgot on here that we have tested data and we have other proprietary research that also backs this up. So the list is longer than what you have here.
Yeah. And so I know that SEOs have a pretty short memory, and all the debate 2 years ago, are entities a thing, is just out of sight, out of mind. But if you're someone who's been told that entities isn't how it works, I think you need to go back to the source of that information and bring up this evidence and see what they say. Are they even willing to look at the evidence, or does the argument stand sight unseen?
I think regardless of whether the guru you're listening to is some SEO guru or John Mueller, you might take either of them with a grain of salt. But when you see Google's behavior, the actual search engine's behavior, when you're looking up types of frogs or whatever, that evidence is much more compelling than what any guru will tell you. You know, if you can see it in action, and it's hard to dispute. I mean, no matter who's telling you otherwise.
That's an interesting thing, because Terry, you started out by saying that you were skeptical when the claims first started coming out. Sort of, how did that skepticism evolve? What was it that changed your thoughts on entities?
Mostly case studies and a couple things I tried, but just again, just seeing the algorithm reaction, what it does with entities. It's hard to deny that entities have an effect on the SERPs. So
cool.
I have no problem with being a skeptic on anything, but then when you're presented with evidence, at some point you take a side, I think.
So we have a really good question from Charles Taylor. How do I use this in testing or on my website? And it's really simple. You pick the entities that make sense for your content, and you make sure you're using them on the page. You pepper them throughout the content appropriately. And if you want to do even better SEO, you make sure that you're using them in the right amounts to be competitive. Entities are another factor where diversity of them tends to help you, but you have to be careful because some entities can take you off topic. So not all entities are correct. As Lee has mentioned before about plumbing, if you go to the Wikipedia page about plumbing, they'll mention a bunch of entities on that page, but you don't want them all on the website for a plumber, because the ones about the Latin origins of the word plumbing and the Roman Empire and their aqueducts are not appropriate for a plumber's service page. So not all entities are the right entities, and you have to use your brain and pick the ones that make sense topically. And then you use them the same way that you use LSI words. So you pick the ones that make sense and you skip the rest. And then on top of that, you might remember that a few months ago, there was a big stir in the Facebook SEO groups about LSI. And so people got upset about LSI being some type of shady, scammy thing, but it's not. It's the exact same thing as entities. It's just discovered a different way. So LSI keywords are words that co-occur on pages that rank well. And it turns out that entities are also words that co-occur on pages that rank well. It's just that one is found from these databases that were constructed by human beings or curated through NLP processes, and the other is discovered statistically. But they're both used the same way. And the entity databases out there typically only have data in about a dozen languages. So the services that parse entities typically only return entities in about a dozen languages. So if you have a client that's in Vietnam, you don't get the entity data from those databases and tool sets necessarily. So what you end up having to do in those cases is to fall back on LSI keywords, which will have a significant amount of overlap. But you still have to use your brain. You pick the ones that make sense for your page, and you make sure you're using them on your page. You want the appropriate amount of diversity. You want a competitive amount of quantity. Let's see. Charles asks, what are ways to find related entities? Probably a show of its own. A lot of tools do it. I've seen people get entities out of Google Docs. So apparently there's a feature in Google Docs that'll show you entities. TextRaiser is a service that I use and recommend to my clients. It's integrated in Cora. That's where Cora gets its entity data. I like the TextRaiser one because it's built on the Google NLP stack. And I think it's likely that Google uses its own technology. We don't know for certain that they do, but if you had to place a bet, I think that's probably as good a bet as you could place. And yeah, there's a ton of keyword tools out there that'll give you entities. And you could also just, go straight to the data sources, go to Wikidata, go to Freebase, and look up your topics. Lee, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tools. My hesitation with recommending any of them is that they're all flawed to a degree. You can pick entities off page, like looking at this slide. Evidence is an entity. Entities is an entity. Google is an entity. Patent is an entity. So what is this particular? If this were the page that you wrote about, it's not entirely on a single topic, because even the word entities only appears once on the page, and a lot of the other words on this particular slide aren't tied to it. So, and you see that a lot when tools extract, they will extract a lot of different entities, but only a portion of them are relevant to the topics that you're writing for. And that's the hard part. Everybody wants the push button tool. Nobody wants to do a little bit of work and sort of look and say, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And that's the biggest thing that you need to be doing with deciding what entities to include and exclude from your content.
Yeah. And so Paul in YouTube is saying he was super skeptical and didn't really understand them, but he did A/B testing across 2 sites. That's exactly the right way to approach any concept in SEO. That's the right way to do it. You don't make a definitive answer based on your logical thinking going, it can't possibly work that way. Google's too smart to do it. Therefore, I'm right. That testing is the right way. So the fact that you A/B test, you prove it for yourself, 100%. If you're skeptical and don't believe it, run a test. Absolutely. Let's see what else is going on here. Paul also said earlier that he loves using entities and his site increased well after starting to use them. So good to know that, he has another anecdotal account of them working. And there's a lot of those. It's not one or two. There are hundreds upon hundreds of SEOs who have given entities a try and seen good results. So that's all I have on this topic. I see that Clint has joined us. So Clint, is there any news on SEO this week?
No new news.
Any news out of SIA? How'd the migration go from Skype over to Slack?
Good, seamless. Everyone who bitched were people that we had in the Skype for free. So if they want to join, they can pay now.
Oh. All right. And just so people know, what is this we're talking about?
Now you threw me off, but we moved. We actually had 2 groups, and it is. This is good information for people if you're trying to start a community or something like that. You have several options, and create your own forum, use a Facebook group, use Skype or use Slack. And if you choose a chat system like a Skype, a Slack, Discord, one of the things you'll find is that Skype is not conducive to individual conversations. I.e., you can't. You have a thread, and then everyone's replying to you, and it just hides everything, and things get lost. Whereas Slack has answers for that in the channels and stuff. So we moved everything over to that, and in conjunction with that, we launched the new members area. And the new testing setup. So before you had to go through and kind of search through the tests, and even then the search system was discombobulated, et cetera. So they're all sorted: positive ranking factors, negative ranking factors, on page, off page, keywords, research, that kind of stuff now, and it's all built into what is now obvious that we should have done in the first place was a knowledge graph system or a knowledge panel system. So the same kind of thing if you would go to a support desk, for example. And so we ended the monthly webinars. I do the weekly AMAs now. Bill Hartzer still does his podcasts, and we'll be announcing all the tests inside of the Slack group. So everything is conducive. And they get the tests as we get the tests. So instead of waiting for the end of the month to see test results, you get that stuff trickled down, and you can actually leverage it a whole lot faster. Because our tests, even though they are hidden behind a members area, that results do get spread around. And sometimes people miss out on taking the opportunity of that because people go through and either fry the method or talk about it, et cetera. So.
And if anyone wants to learn more about your group, where can they learn?
SEOintel.com. Easy to remember now.
Yeah, and I do advise you join a group. It doesn't have to be this group, but it's really a good thing when you can ask a question to 200 internet marketers saying, hey, I'm about to do this to my client's website. Is it a good idea?
Yeah.
That's a power tool right there. It's probably one of the best tools you can get in SEO. And there's a lot of great groups out there. There's MFG and Semantic Mastery, and there's a lot of them. So I recommend that you get into one. SIA is one that's largely about testing and support, community support, and so it's cool. I'm in SIA. I think a lot of names are in SIA as well. On the topic of entities, Clint, we never got your opinion. So we're talking about, how 2-3 years ago, there were SEOs saying that we didn't know what we were talking about and Google doesn't use entities. And that was a big load of crap. And so we took the opportunity today to review the evidence for entities just to see how things shook out. And so where do you stand on all of that?
Well, you know where I stand. I was the first one to bring the idea of putting entities in Quora. You wouldn't do it until the great Lee said, let's add text raiser. Still bitter about that, by the way. But I love the use of entities. I came in when you were talking about the LSI argument. I was one of the guys that stirred that up in the second round. I know you started it the first round, and I started it the second round, and to me, that's a logical thing, right? LSI keywords work, so entities ergo should work, and entities are, as you label them, super LSI. And then we lost I don't necessarily lost the argument, but they were arguing that LSI keywords were not a thing because latent semantic indexing, the concept of latent semantic indexing, was reportedly not used by Google as part of their algorithm. But the concept of LSI keywords did not match the concept of latent semantic indexing, ergo they're two different things. And because the name was hijacked, that is their argument that LSI keywords are not a thing. And continually over and over, TF, IDF, all those various different things are all essentially talking about the same thing. Like words in content that's about the same thing, it's more likely you're going to see this thing over and over again. So if you're talking about drug rehab and Lee talks about drug rehab, Terry Power talks about drug rehab, and Honey writes about drug rehab, all of us may come from a different perspective, but at the end of the day, we're going to talk about drug rehab and rehabilitation and specific drugs and all that stuff. So those are all going to be seen in our content. And that's, to me, is really what entities is about. Now you add in machine learning and you add in artificial intelligence and you look at what they're doing with the maps and you're looking with how they're creating knowledge graph IDs. To me, it seemed like a natural thing for them to say, all right, now we have these known person, place, things, events. And now instead of pretending that Google can actually, the math can read a piece of content, which we know for a fact that they can't. Ergo, none of Kyle Roosh's lorem ipsum tests would still be in the top 2 pages of Google for their search results, and they are, even after the last update. So we know Google can't read. So how do they do that? And I think really it's a big mathematical algorithm designed to play word association. And the best words they can use are things that they know are factual: persons, place, things, events, and things. So entities. And that's, to me, how that's going to progress. And as it tightens up more and they associate things better with more, it'll make content optimization with entities a little bit harder. But I still think that you can, steadily beat your competitors with just on page using entities as part of your optimization thing. In regards to tools, I wouldn't recommend relying on just one. I'd say doing a phrase / text razor to run and then going, we use ClearScope. ClearScope is Google NLP and IBM Watson. And then we move on to InLinks. InLinks is Google NLP. And then he's got a couple other NLP algorithms, I guess is the term, that do really good at playing word association and figuring out context of how that entity is placed in the term to you. So that's, and at the end of the day, to Lee's point, I don't want to recommend because people are not using their brains. Well, you need a tool to get started to make those decisions. And I think that's more to the point where which tool do you start with and then which tool do you end with? And obviously, you can start with Phrase, Surfer, ClearScope, Cognitive SEO, or Page Optimizer Pro, or even Cora. But at the end of the day, the tool you need to end with is your brain, like Lee said. So hopefully I brought something to that conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. So JM asks, what are some ways that SEOs are using entities to influence rankings? And I'll kick that off with, you just pepper them throughout your content in the hot zones. So primarily in headings, page title, sentences on page, and probably your primary navigation menus. So when you look at e-com store categories, those all tend to be entities. And if you have things that are not good entities, you probably need to fix them. So you see this oftentimes in e-com product names where the store wants to be high-end and artisanal, so they create these artistic product titles. So it's a majestic sunrise snuffler, and it's like, no, it's an orange scarf. People are searching for orange scarf. Orange and scarf are both entities understood by the NLP, so call it a damn orange scarf. And so that's the common mistake, is people get artistic and they destroy their relevancy and their SEO by using these artistic ideas that don't help the way people search. What do you think, Clint? Do you use them in any other ways?
I changed the way I order content and I think all of us are guilty of, I want SEO optimized content. Or can you be an SEO content writer? And frankly, I think that's the why all of the content for most SEO sites is just complete shit, right? It's just written horribly. It's people just peppering words in and doing their whatever they think. So what I found the best way to leverage entities is create a good outline. I like think college paper and use your headings and create a good outline for what you want and give that to a writer without tying their hands behind their back, asking for SEO content, and let them research that stuff. And when they research it, they are naturally going to enter entities into your content. And you're going to get content from good writers that'll score, let's say a phrase. Let's use a phrase, for example. They're going to cover about 75% of the entities that you should naturally have into your content right off the bat with good writers. So that's how I start. And then I'll move to doing a phrase. What else is in there? What can I add? What that is relevant, and then move to ClearScope, do the same thing. And by the time I get to end links, I'm just grading at that point. End links, you don't necessarily have to add. But at the end of the day, it's finding. I don't know about menus and all that stuff, but you can pretty much knock out 100% of your entities that you need inside your headings and your paragraphs and create really well written content that passes a grammar test and reads well and converts well.
And that's a good point, because you have to do the word math, the relevancy math, in order to speak to the algorithm. But ultimately, you have to speak to human beings to get a sale. Yeah. So you can't neglect either. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, you're going to have to find a balance between the two. Let's see, when we talk about using entities on a page, does that just mean using them as keywords? Yep. There's nothing technical about this other than making sure you have good on-topic diversity, as well as the right amounts to be competitive. And so along the lines of like keyword density and match counts, entities kind of play the same game. And so you got to be mindful that you are using them. If all of your competitors are using, 1,000 entities on page, you can't write a short post with 12 entities and assume you have competitive parity, because you don't. So you just have to be mindful about the degree of tuning, and that will change from one keyword to the next. What do you think, Lee?
I think it's true. I think, if you think about it like keyword variations, things that you want to see on a page, that, it works well. But I'm going to echo what Clint said. I don't use writers. I use AI to generate a lot of content. And if you can deliver a good outline, which takes some work up front, but if you can deliver a good outline, AI, just like a good writer, will naturally use most of the entities, in the space that you're trying to write about, and that gets it covered. And then if you want to check, there are a lot of different tools that can, look and see what entities potentially you're missing, and you can choose to sprinkle those in to get more completeness.
And Terry, haven't heard from you in a bit. Any thoughts on all of this?
Well, I think of the importance of entities in local. You've got all those geos you can use, and various entities describing the geo, whether it's a neighborhood, a city, places to visit, things to see and do, all that kind of stuff. Plenty of room to get them in there. And again, look at your competition, see what they're doing, and do better.
Here's a good question. Is it important to use entities and anchor text? What do you think, Clint? You do a lot of anchor text tuning.
Yeah, I mean, if to me, my recommendation to everybody is to stop using generics. Click here or open this website, we'll go here, and replace that with the entities list. You get much better value out of that.
So there you go. Let's see, that brings us to about 50 minutes here. So I think we'll call it a wrap here. But let us know in the comments what experience you've had using entities. We'd be interested to hear about it, and we'll see you next time. Oh, but before I go, I see that Carolyn's here. Carolyn, what's going on with your podcast?
Hey, I think I'm going to kind of update a little bit on the open tests I have running, the mobile indexing.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, and then I am working on a bigger case study, which I guess is focusing more on difficult keywords, shall we say, and using Lee's training, the information in Lee's training to attempt to do so.
Nice. So where can people find your podcast?
You can Google Confessions of an SEO, or any of the podcast platforms should have it. I'm even a hit in Malta.
Nice. And when does the new episode come out?
Friday mornings at 8:00 Central Standard Time.
Yeah, and this is a labor of love for you, but you accept sponsors, right, to help you keep it going?
Mwah! Love you. Love you. Yes, I do. And I think I'm also going to have not a contest per se, but it's kind of like an open ask for topics over the summer, and coming up with, like, if your topic is chosen, we say your name, give you a link from a SEO related page. And then just maybe at the end, just have a whole drawing for everybody who submitted one, but maybe it wasn't chosen, and give them something of value.
So if people are interested in helping you sponsor your content and research, and I'll let you know, her sponsorships cost like a cup of coffee a month. It's not a big ask. How can people find out where to go?
You can just Google Confessions of an SEO sponsor, and any of those entries will have a link in there. It'll take you right to it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a sponsor. I think it's really difficult to make content about SEO because it like pays no bills and it takes a ton of time and energy. And it crushes me that, like Clint is too busy with SEO this week because that show was so amazing and we're all jonesing for it to come back. So you got to lend support to SEO content creators because unfortunately, SEO is not a hot enough topic to make ad revenue on the YouTube platform. It'll never be a big income. Even the big SEOs, like the biggest ones there, they make like $700 a month. Like they're not quitting a day job over that. So if that's the best it gets in our niche, the rest of us, we're making a cup of coffee, bringing you this content. So if you can, please do sponsor her. It goes a long way to keeping content coming. And hopefully we'll get SEO this week back once Clint gets his time back.
Yes.
So crossing fingers, Clint. All right, with that, we will see you next time. So let me stop the share